Man's honor was everything to him back in this time. Uh, we're going to see disputes over honor. We're going to see duels. We're going to see things. People were very, filled with pride, I suppose, even more than people are today, I think. And honor was so important. And so here we are. They're saying we're laying it out on the line. We're willing to give up our lives if necessary. And also, I want to point out one other thing. Notice the transition from colonies to states. I think that's kind of interesting. He starts out by saying these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And then from then on, he talks about states. And again, there's an appeal to God, but again, using Enlightenment language, not necessarily something you would see in the Bible, but the supreme judge of the world. All right, Scott, what did you want to add about that?
Yeah, that adds it up really well, and these are things that constitutional scholars would still be arguing today with, coupled with the Establishment Clause, what are religious versus Enlightenment versus secular, whatever that would have meant to an 18th century person undergirding these ideas. But let's get to the aftermath. Once it's released, George obviously does not see this for a while because there's an ocean between them and England, but what happens?
Well, it doesn't solve all the problems. I'll mention again, just to review, the document is formally approved on July 4th, 1776, and the colonies don't just get along and hold hands and sit around and play drums and sing Kumbaya. There's still conflict between the colonies. They begin to quarrel among themselves. They had been quarreling and they continue to quarrel. They fight for control over land, especially land west of the Appalachian Mountains. Some of the colonies, or states now, I guess it's proper to call them states, they basically said, okay, take our northern border, take our southern border, and extend them all the way to the Pacific Ocean. That's our land. Like, imagine Connecticut. Well, the problem with that is that goes right through New York and other lands that not everybody was going to concede to Connecticut. So
could you imagine that North and South Carolina cutting through parts of California? That'd be very interesting.
Yeah, that's not going to work. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and especially at the federal level, and they realized the federal level such that it is. There's not much of a federal government. It's just the Continental Congress. But so finally, the states decided to cede, C-E-D-E, in other words, give up their rights to unclaimed land to Congress. So all the Western lands that were formerly British and they're hoping will become American, those are going to be controlled by Congress, aka the federal government. So no more Connecticut goes all the way to the Pacific, or like you said, South Carolina, North Carolina. They're going to actually acknowledge that they do have a Western boundary. Congress sends ambassadors to France and Spain to try to form alliances and to get military aid. That's going to take a while. And then I have to throw in one quote from Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin's another great quotable person. He is said to have stated after the Declaration of Independence was formally ratified or passed, whatever you want to call it. Franklin says this: "We must all hang together, or assuredly we will all hang separately." I love that. My students always get a chuckle out of that one. So we've declared independence, but that's a declaration. We've passed a document. We've made a formal statement, but it's one thing to declare independence and it's another thing to actually gain it. So we're going to, in the future, in our subsequent episodes, we'll look at the attempt to actually make this a real deal and not just a statement.
Right, and unfortunately, we're going to lose Ben Franklin here because he is going to go to France and try to form military alliances there. That's a whole other topic, and there are some great books where you can see what that looks like. One of the easiest books to jump into to look at the life of Ben Franklin is a recent biography by Walter Isaacson. Another book that looks specifically at early American diplomatic efforts is called Yankees at the Court, the First Americans in Paris, that came out in the early 80s. Franklin was really, you see his skills on full display here. He's in his 70s at this point, and when he arrives in France, he figured that the way that he could appeal to French elite admiration was to dive in as hard as possible to really play up his Americanness. So he'd wear colonial buckskins and a beaver hat. He wouldn't dress like a diplomat, but like he was a frontiersman when Franklin never lived in the frontier. He was a city boy through and through. And when John Adams joins him in 1778, he was shocked at Franklin's dress and demeanor, but he realized that what Franklin was doing was working. There were commemorative coins of Franklin at this time. He was the toast of Paris. He was invited to all of the different French elite aristocratic events there. So it's unlikely that any ordinary diplomat would have achieved what Franklin did, but he was able to understand how to gain the sympathies of his audience. And lastly, this really inspires me because, James, both you and I had spent time in foreign countries and had struggled with native languages. And there's a tendency when you're not communicating primarily in your native language that you assume everyone thinks that you're stupid because you mispronounce things, you say things incorrectly, and therefore you really can't do anything meaningful in life. Franklin spoke terrible French when he was in France.
Yeah.
He wasn't like Thomas Jefferson, who was a lifelong Francophile. Jefferson, I'm sure, would have spoke gorgeously and could quote philosophers, or he would have just quoted them original Latin because that's who Jefferson was. One account of a historian I read showed some of Franklin's writings in French and showed them to a French teacher. And the French instructor said that Franklin could have had maybe a B- for comprehension, which is the easiest part of language. He would have had a C for spoken French, or a C or C-, and an F for written French.
Oh, man.
So his French was terrible, but he successfully negotiated an alliance with one of the most powerful nations in the world at the time. So think about that. If you have the cleverness to use what you have, even if it's not great, you can accomplish great things. So I'm inspired by that aspect of Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. And once again, I got to throw in a plug for the John Adams miniseries. This whole episode of Franklin's time in Paris and his interactions with John Adams, very well portrayed in there.
Yeah.
The man who plays Franklin is brilliant. What is his name? Tom Wilkerson.
He's a character actor. You recognize him when you see him in movies, but you forget who he is. He's one of those guys you see in all these movies.
Yeah, he gets into the character so much you don't even recognize him. And then later, after it's over, you think, wait a minute, what have I seen him? And you Google it, and it's like, oh, really? Tom Wilkerson plays Cornwallis in the movie The Patriot.
Right. I noticed that when I saw IMDb. That was a nice connection there.
And he plays LBJ in the movie Selma, which, of course, that's way out of our time frame here, and he also plays a Southern senator in the movie The Conspirator, which is about the trial of the Lincoln conspirators after Lincoln's assassination. So he's very versatile, but he keeps popping up in these historical movies as totally different people. I love his Franklin. He's so good.
Right. He's a statesman, clever, also the dirty old man. So maybe that's why he does so well in France. But he was the right person for the time. John Adams was not.
No.
But great for England. Maybe we won't give away too much there. But yeah, Franklin, sad to lose him at this point, but great story. So I recommend reading up at his experiences in France at this time. All right. Well, that is the Declaration of Independence and events leading up to it. We're going to return to our military history narrative in the next episode, and likely the one after that. We're going to look at the New York campaign. All right. Well, that wraps up our exploration of the past for this episode. As always, I want to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, especially our spy masters, Bill Ivey, Joyce Normant, Tyler from Colorado, Josh Reddick, Baron Fraser, Chris from Maine, Carl from Norway, Moondoggy from Ohio, Rick Knowlton, Vic and Irene, Mike from New York, Michelle, and Marlene. I'll explain what that is in a second. If you like the show and want to help it grow, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, like and subscribe to the show on the podcast player of your choice. This helps spread the word about the show. 2, join our Facebook group. Here we can keep the discussion going about new episodes, and you can talk about what you like and didn't like. And you can find this group if you just search for History Unplugged on Facebook. 3, we have an online store with t-shirts, phone covers, and other accessories featuring awesomely bad history puns that were crowdsourced by you, the audience. And you can find that if you go to public.com and look for History Unplugged, or you just go to historyonthenet.com and look for our store there. 4, and this is really the best way to dive deep with History Unplugged, and that's to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you know your American history, you know the Knowlton's Rangers were an elite spy and reconnaissance group in the American Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the membership program of History Unplugged. You can join at 3 levels. If you join at the level of Scout, you can hear all the episodes of History Unplugged completely ad-free and get early access to new episodes, at least a week early. If you join at the Intelligence Officer level, you get special bonus episodes, like a 10-part series on the World War II hero Audie Murphy, a multi-part series called Ottoman Lives about different people in the Ottoman Empire, and a series called Rendezvous with Death that looks at biographical profiles of Americans who went to fight in World War I before America entered the war. The last level is Spy Master, where you get all that stuff, but you also get 3 hardcover history books, Forging a President, How the Wild West Created Teddy Roosevelt, Race to the Top of the World, Richard Byrd and the First Flight to the North Pole, and The Last Fighter Pilot, the true story of the final combat mission of World War II. Another bonus is, you can choose a history topic for me to focus on for an entire episode that can go up to an hour, and I'll answer whatever question you have for me, and you get a shout out at the end of each episode. If you want to learn how to become a member of the Knowlton's Rangers, go to patreon.com/unplugged. That's patreon.com/unplugged. All right, well, that is all for my spiel. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast, from ancient Greece to the Cold War and everything else in between. See you next time.